I am live. It's Gordon Causey coming to you, as always, or as almost always, live and unscripted. On this, today is Wednesday, February 12th, 2025. It is 10:15, 10:16 now, p.m. in my time zone, Eastern time zone. I reside in southeastern Ontario. As reference, if I can get my hand above my thumb, there's the CN Tower. That's a print of a painting, and that's the CN Tower as it would have looked facing south at about King Street back in and around 1977, 1978. I see Danny has shown up here, praying hands and the cross. God bless you, sir. Candy the Wonder Pup is going crazy. This is my dog, Candy the Wonder Dog, not the pup. She's 5+ years old. We should have named her. I've said it many times. She should have been named COVID or Corona because she came into the family March 18th of 2020 when the world locked down. And poor dog is not very well socialized, but when she's at home, she certainly has she's not shy around the family. So I make her jump through a few hoops. She has trained me. I have to give her a treat at the start of every video. So shake, lay down. Oh, there's a big bark. And there she goes. Candy the Wonder Dog has been taken care of. And hopefully she doesn't make too much noise. Hopefully no one goes walking down the street. Um, Everyone many people in southern Ontario right now are bracing for what is supposed to be a significant winter storm, talking about 15, 20 centimeters. That's in and around, maybe 8, 9, 10 inches. If there are any Americans watching this, I know I have a number of American subscribers. We'll see if anyone shows up. I'm going to be talking about all things Donald Trump, but I'm going to go back in history to start this video, back to the beginning of the free trade era, back to the year 1988, when there was a contested federal election going on, and the two primary players were John Turner of the Liberal Party of Canada, who was opposing free trade, and conservative Brian Mulroney, who had just signed a deal. He had inked a deal with the Reagan administration in the United States of America to bring in free trade. This was in the dying days of the Reagan presidency before George H.W. Bush, George Bush the Elder, won the subsequent election, I believe, against Michael Dukakis, I think. Um, at any rate, I see I have C.O. Jamalik here. Good to have you back. C.O. Jamalik is an American, and I appreciate my American friend showing up. I know that there has been some animosity between Canadians and Americans. We've seen news reports of Canadians booing the American national anthem. I find that disgusting and repugnant. And equally, there have been Americans who have retaliated down in Tennessee between a game. I think it was between the Nashville Predators and the Ottawa Senators. And when the Canadian national anthem was being sung, Americans responded in kind by booing "O Canada." And this is something the world does not need right now. But if we go back to Canada and US, we have long been partnered in many respects. The origin stories of the two countries are very similar. The United States was a British colony, so was Canada. America came into being by way of revolution, by a Declaration of Independence in 1776. Following that, there was a protracted War of Independence. Americans actually didn't win their independence until I don't know. My American history is wanting a bit. I think it was 1783 before it was like a 7, 8 year long war before the Americans won their independence. By contrast, Canadians we stayed in the fold of our British, of the crown, if you will, and until 1867. And even then, we didn't get a constitution in this country. The top law of the land was called the British North America Act, and it was housed in Great Britain. It wasn't until 1983 or 1984, maybe 1981. I can't remember the exact year, but it was in the 80s when finally we repatriated, is the term, the Constitution, and we wrote our own Constitution, our own Charter of Rights and Freedoms, far weaker than the Constitution of the United States, and our Charter of Rights and Freedoms does not have the same protections that the American Bill of Rights does. But that's a bit of a side issue. But up until 1988, the economy of the Canadian economy was by and large built east and west. Yes, was trade, obviously, between the Canada and the US. We had something called the Auto Pact. We would enter into trade agreements with the US, but they tended to be uh, industry specific. They were not broad and wide scope agreements. That changed in 1988 when the free trade agreement, it was called back then, it was called the Canada-US Free Trade Agreement. That was passed in 1988 and became law, came into effect the year following in 1989. And then in 1994, a few years later, I guess 5 years or so later, that Canada-US Free Trade Agreement was expanded to include Mexico, and at that point it became known as NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And back in 1988 and again in 1994, I was opposed to this trade agreement because it shifted the economic landscape in Canada from east west, and it eroded our sovereignty. I'm going to share with you now a clip from the debate between the aforementioned John Turner of the Liberal Party of Canada and Brian Mulroney, the leader of the Conservative Prime Minister of Canada. Brian Mulroney at this time was running for re-election. What had happened is Brian Mulroney had been elected in 1984, and he had been asked during that election campaign the question of a free trade agreement, of establishing free trade with the United States. It had come up before. It had always been resisted. And Brian Mulroney, given his strong business background, was asked if his government would pursue a free trade agreement with the United States. And given the political realities of 1984, he said, no, we would not. But then, after he had been elected to a very large majority, he actually won in that 1984 election. He won over 50% of the vote. The Liberal Party had been ruling Canada for about 34 years straight, and actually over 50 years with just one small break in between when John Diefenbaker's Conservatives had ruled. I'm just going to read, before I show you the clip, I'm going to read what's being written. Danny's saying that in Montreal, where he is, Montreal, which there's a little another difference between the United States and Canada. In Canada, we have one specific province that they have French is the official language. They used to be part of what is called New France or La Nouvelle France. And I think the year was 1759, the British came and they conquered it, and they took over the province of Quebec, and it became incorporated into what would eventually become the Dominion of Canada. And French, the French language to this day remains the predominant language in the province of Quebec. Montreal is a bit of an international city in that I have gone downtown Montreal into a dépanneur, which is their word for a convenience store, and I wanted to buy some stamps. And I am reasonably bilingual. And I went in and I said, Est-ce que vous vendez des timbres? Do you sell stamps? And the young lad working behind the counter said, Oh, sorry, man, I don't speak French. And I was right in downtown Montreal. Montreal, you can get by there very well without speaking any French. Just don't go too far east. Don't go to Saint Leonard or further east. Then you'll be in trouble. The further west you go on the island of Montreal, it gets more and more English. Let me read what's being said. So Danny is saying that in Montreal, they are expecting something in somewhere between 25 to as many as 40 centimeters of snow, with the temperature forecast to be, oh, he's writing 10 to 15 inches. And that's in less than 12 hours. Wow. Brett Skinner, who has been on the channel many times before, and if memory serves, he is from the great state of Wyoming, a state I visited. COJ Malik writes, America fails to realize technology has made the world smaller and able to grow food in places that maybe wasn't as good. America's #1 agricultural export is soybeans for animal feed. Duckweed has same protein content and can be grown in large containers of water easily, giving other countries more independence. And Danny's writing off topic, but I love the cup. Mine says, sorry for what I said before. Coffee. My mug that he's referencing says, current mood? Nope. It was a Christmas present I got. And it's a great coffee mug to have in the morning when you don't want to deal with people. And I am not a morning person, but I am a night owl. As you can probably guess, I start most of my videos 9:30, 10, 10:30. Sometimes I'll even start one after midnight. At any rate, I want to share this video clip. This again is from the 1988 federal election. John Turner is the gentleman with the white hair, and Brian Mulroney is the guy with the rather large chin, a good Irish mug on Brian Mulroney. And the two of them are arguing, and I'm just going to share one small clip. This is from the archives at Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, back at a time when people trusted, by and large, the CBC News. People hadn't woken up to the fact that the mainstream media lies almost as a matter of course. They frame the narrative, they steer the population, they tell us what to think, what to believe, and even how to feel. But it wasn't as blatant as it was before, or it wasn't as blatant as it is now. So let me bring this up, make sure that it is sharing. It is sharing. Let me widen up my screen. Get it nice and wide. Now, for anyone watching this in the United States, you might be the gentleman here who's facing the camera is John Turner, leader of the Liberal Party. Liberals in Canada wear red. Conservatives typically wear blue. You will see that Brian Mulroney is wearing a blue tie. It's the reverse of what you see in the United States. In the United States, the Republicans wear red and the Democrats wear blue. In Canada, it is the reverse. This is John Turner, his tongue sticking out. He's getting ready to go toe-to-toe with Brian Mulroney. Let me play the clip, if I can get to it. Here we go.
We built a country, east and west and north. We built it on an infrastructure that deliberately resisted the continental pressure of the United States. For 120 years, we've done it. With one signature of a pen, you've reversed that, thrown us into the north-south influence of the United States, and will reduce us, I'm sure, to a colony of the United States, because when the economic levers go, the political independence is sure to follow.
Mr. Turner, with a document that's cancelable on 6 months' notice, be serious.
Look,
Be serious.
Cancelable. You're talking about our relationship with the United States. Once that
commercial document document that's
One set-
cancelable on 6 months' notice?
Commercial document.
That is what it is.
document
It is a
relates
commercial
to
treaty.
it relates to every facet of our life.
It
It's
is
far
commercial
more
treaty.
important to
Mr.
us than it is to the United States.
Sir,
Far
please be-
more important.
Please be serious.
Well, I am
on that.
serious. I've never been more serious
Yeah,
in my life.
Please.
Volunteering.
I will stop the sharing at that point. We don't need to see an ad. I think John Turner's commentary all the way back in 1988, how many years ago was that? 12 plus 25, 37 years ago, was eerily prophetic, stating that we would become a colony, if you will, of the United States of America, a 51st state, and that it was far more important to the United States to gain access to our resources than it was, and what Canada gave up in signing that free trade agreement, which later would expand to include the nation of Mexico, NAFTA, the North American free trade agreement. It has damaged Canada. It has damaged the U.S. as well, but Canadians far more. We are incredibly now far more reliant on the United States of America than we were back prior to that agreement having been signed. Back then, we had a textile industry, we had a manufacturing industry. We ceded so many sectors of our economy fled south. Initially, they fled south to the United States of America. And then in 1994, when Mexico was brought on board, those jobs fled even further south to Mexico. What remains of the Canadian steel industry, which is what brings this to bear, because I wrote it down on March 12th. So a month from today, the US is slated to impose 25% tariffs on all aluminum and steel products being imported into the United States, regardless of country, from Mexico, from Canada, from China, from everywhere. Everywhere, every place that's is exporting steel and aluminum products, those importing the products from a country like Canada or Mexico or anywhere else, those importers will then have to pay a 25% tariff to the US government. The reason for doing it, the US steel industry is in as maybe even in worse shape than Canada's. Canada, we have the benefit of having a 70-cent dollar roughly. It's been hovering below 70 cents. And so with the US dollar being so much more valuable than our own, it gives us an advantage in trade with the US. Some might consider it an unfair subsidy. During the Chrétien years, and now we're going into the 90s and into the 2000s, we had, at that time, the dollar was at 82, 83 cents, and the US was claiming that it represented an unfair subsidy because it made Canadian produced goods far cheaper than it made more sense to import from Canada than to produce in the United States. And what Donald Trump is trying to do, in my mind, I don't think there's any question, is he is attempting to revive the US steel industry. You might remember Billy Joel, famous American singer. Certainly, he was all over the top 40 when I was in high school and for years after growing up. And one of his songs was called Allentown. Allentown was a steel town in Pennsylvania. And they've taken all the coke from the ground and the union people blown away. And we're living here in Allentown. The U.S. steel industry was decimated. In Buffalo, they had talking proud. There were 1 million+ people. And then Bethlehem Steel shut down. and Buffalo resorted to being what they call the donut. And this happened in a lot of American cities. It happened in Detroit, where the inner core, the urban center of a city, became derelict, became abandoned. All the money fled, and the the communities surrounding the city, surrounding Detroit, surrounding Buffalo, they were very affluent, wealthy, service sector jobs, banking, finance, things like that, not producing anything, not making anything. That's where the wealthy lived. And it was the poor and the working poor who remained in the inner city cores, and the inner city cores were in decay in the United States. And we've seen the same dynamic playing out here in Canada, just not as to not the same degree. Let me read what is being written by Danny. 80s pain relief cream commercials for $400, Gordon. What is a Voltaren ad? Danny is channeling the old Jeopardy show. COJ Malik wrote, create a monopoly with Brazil and Mexico and raise the price of steel simultaneously. If Donald Trump wants to revive the American steel industry, money talks. And if the United States can import steel more cheaply from countries like Canada or from China or from anywhere else in the world, well, why be paying American workers union scale wages when you can get it cheap? And the same thing has happened throughout the Western world. I'm trying to remember the name of the town. I think it's Birmingham, England. They call them Brummies. If you've ever seen the movie The Full Monty from Birmingham, England, where the guys all were working in the steel mill and then they all got laid off and they were without work. It was a great movie. And what did they end up doing? They saw the women going in to watch the Chippendale strippers. Well, the Chippendales didn't go the full Monty. These guys went the full Monty. There was a social commentary to that movie about what happens when a country basically lowers its borders, says it's a free for all, everyone come in. And that can be economically, that can be through immigration as well. Your national identity, sense of pride can be eroded. Canada and America have always been great friends with free trade or without free trade. The Toronto Blue Jay baseball team came into being in 1977, long before free trade. Before that, the Montreal Expos joined the National League in Major League Baseball. And the original 6 hockey teams, and there were 2 Canadian teams, the Toronto Maple Leafs and Montreal Canadiens, and 4 American teams, New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, Boston Bruins, and Chicago Blackhawks. I think I said Chicago twice. Chicago, Boston, New York, and Detroit Red Wings. How can I forget Gordie Howe's old team? Let me read what's being written. Danny's channeling Billy Joel. Well, we're living here in Allentown, and they're closing all the factories down. And you can't, it's hard to keep a good man down, but I won't be getting up today. And we're living here in Allentown. I invite you to listen to the song. Great song. Billy Joel was more than just a pop artist. He wrote some very poignant songs. He wrote a song called The Downeaster Alexa about fishermen trying to make a living. Yeah. I got bills to pay and children who need clothes. I know there's fish out there, but where God only knows. Great singer-songwriter, Billy Joel. But that's not, I'm not a social commentary, pop culture type YouTuber. That's not my lane. Although it does enter in a bit, sure. CO Jamalik says, does the US have the infrastructure for steel? That's a debatable point, but I would say this, the US can certainly resurrect it, to use a Christian term. If they had it, the United States certainly had the infrastructure for steel. And if they had it, it can be revived. But in order for it to be revived, there has to be a market for it. And the largest single market in the United States, the world's largest economy, is still the United States of America. China is on the rise. China is ascending. The US is declining, certainly in terms of the US economy is growing, 1%, 2%, but the Chinese economy is growing by 3, 5, sometimes in and around 10%. And I don't know what year, but it's not long, probably 10 or so years before the Chinese economy is slated to supplant the US economy as the world's number one. China will be the world's economic powerhouse the way things are trending. I think Donald Trump sees the prophetic writing on the wall and is trying to right the ship and is bringing in protectionist measures. The only question I have is it too late in the game? Is it too late in the game for him to be engaging in these type of measures? The US and Canadian economies over these last 30, 40 years have become so incredibly integrated that any trade disputes are going to hurt Americans and they're going to crush Canadians. And this is where John Turner, in that little exchange he had with Brian Mulroney, talking about when the economic levers tilt toward the United States, then the political levers inevitably fall as well. And that Canada in the years to come, he said, would be reduced to nothing more than a colony of the US. And now we have Donald Trump openly speculating about wanting Canada to become the 51st state. And the Canadian identity is far different from what it was in 1988 and years prior. We are far more Americanized now. It was a slow process, but it accelerated greatly after that free trade agreement. Canadians, we watch American television. We watch American movies. We listen to American music. We follow the political goings on in Washington. Often Canadians follow the American political scene more than they follow the domestic Canadian political scene. We have an election happening right now. We're voting, in 3-4 weeks in the province of Ontario, the largest province in this country. 18, 19 million people, nearly half of Canada's population resides in Ontario. We're having an election that's like a state election for my American friends, for C.O. Jamalik, for Brett Skinner, and for anyone else. And the federal election, right now, there is an election going on within the Liberal Party of Canada itself to pick the next Prime Minister of Canada. And Mark Carney, who is being coronated, former governor of the Bank of Canada, former governor of the Bank of England, a guy who loves quantitative easing, which is just a fancy way of saying print more money. Anyway, Mark Print More Money, Carney, has been talking about the fact that, Canadians don't really need steel. We don't use a lot of steel. When's the last time you bought something with steel in it? Well, hello, Mark. You ever driven a car? You play hockey? Look at a net. What's it made out of? Steel. So things are tenuous right now. But I don't want to focus just on the trade front. Why is Trump doing this now? Why now? The world right now is very much, things are shaky. Things are shaky right now. We've got the situation in the Middle East that everyone knows about, the situation between Israel and Hamas. And Trump, I compartmentalize with Trump. I'm not thrilled with these tariffs. I think he should be fixating them on China, not on his allies. I understand the rationale why he's doing it. He wants to revive the US steel industry. Fair enough. Good luck. It's going to hurt us. It's going to hurt you too, but it's going to hurt us more. But on the front, in terms of the Middle East and what he has said regarding the necessity that Hamas release the remaining Israeli hostages and restore them to their families, or at least restore those living to their families, and those who are dead, at least allow them to bury and properly mourn for their dead. We're even talking about babies here. When Hamas stormed in on October 7th into Israel and launched their attack and took the 250 plus hostages, included among those hostages were babies, infants. One was 10 months old. That, if that isn't a war crime, I don't know what is. When have you ever heard of, World War I, World War II? Do you ever remember reading about soldiers for one army storming into another country's territory and then stealing children, babies, and then taking them underground? You had something called the Geneva Convention. The Red Cross would be given access to prisoners of war. They could go in and ensure that the prisoners of war, that POWs, were being treated in a humane fashion. That's not happening here. These are not prisoners of war, they're hostages. These are people who've been kidnapped, including children and babies, and they all need to be restored. And Trump has said that if they are not restored, if they are not all released, both the living and the dead, by Saturday, this coming Saturday at noon, seems as good a time as any, is what he said, then all bets are off. And then later he said all hell could break loose. And what would that mean? What are we going to talk about? Look at what what the Western powers did during the last major world conflict when we were trying to defeat Nazi Germany. What did we do? We bombed the living crap out of the industrial region known as Dresden in Germany. Carpet bombed it into the Stone Age, killed tens of thousands of women and children. The men of fighting age were off fighting, and the Allied forces, Canada, the US, Britain, who did we bomb the hell out of? Women and children, civilians. And then later, after Europe had surrendered, but the Japanese refused to surrender. The Japanese all their men were fighting throughout the Far East. And so what did we do? We killed probably north of 200,000 civilians in Hiroshima and Nagasaki because it was justified. It was justified to achieve the aims of the war, to end the war. What might Israel do to what remains of Gaza if they refuse to release the hostages? Man, oh man, things are getting scary. We're heading to an inflection point in the world. This is something of a theme on my channel. Before I go on, I've been rambling on. Let me see what's being written in the comments. There have been a few have gone up. Danny writes that the lowest bid always wins, typically, unless there's some payola, unless there's some under the money table being slid around. And we're finding out a lot about that through Doge. Trump has openly speculated that with the amount of money flying around, that, and here's a man who used to oversee construction sites for his building projects in places like New York and Florida and elsewhere, and he knows about money under the table. I'm sure he's paid money under the table. When you're dealing with the New York City construction industry, I have little doubt that you're going to be engaged at least somewhat with the mob, because the unions are often influenced, controlled by the mafia. Anyway, just reading, I've got Airworks 07 here. I don't think I've seen your name before. Welcome to the chat. I appreciate you jumping on board. And Airworks 07, loved the Full Monty. So did I. An amazing movie. And again, it was about more than just light comedy about a bunch of guys who were out of work. It was social commentary. It was about, laying yourself bare. when everything's been stripped away from you. And, recovering your humanity. There were deeper themes there than just, surface level. Kind of like my favorite collection of books, the Bible. You can read this surface, you can read this just as literal stories and just, take a very banal, simplistic look at the stories in here, or you can dig deep and find incredibly significant and powerful meanings that relate even to our modern age. Even to our modern age. I do videos talking about, things like the story of Jonah. And people go, oh yeah, a whale or a big fish swallowing someone. Sure, like that ever happened. Okay, so you're just going to look at it like that. Not gonna dig any deeper, eh? All right. Anyway, Airworks writes, hard to know who to vote for in Ontario. We are in a mess. Democracy gives you the choice of which party to vote with, or choose which brand of razor blade you'd rather slit your throat with. It's an old saying, not mine. I have precious little that is new. I'm blessed and cursed with a good memory, though. So there are these old little lines, I remember them. And I'm a bit of an old fart, 58, born in 1966. And I watched that debate between John Turner and Brian Mulroney that I played earlier live when it came on. Incidentally, John Turner lost that election. The Mulroney Conservatives were returned with a second majority mandate. But if you'll recall from that clip, uh, Brian Mulroney waved off John Turner's concerns and liberal concerns, and said, "Come on, we've got a 6-month cancellation clause." And I was reading commentary at the time by people far smarter than I, and they were saying, "Yeah, that's just a red herring. That's just put there for political purposes. Once you start to fully integrate the Canadian and American economies, you're not talking about something that can be just canceled in 6 months without wreaking havoc on the respective economies. And Canada, being the smaller player, is going to suffer worse. We entered into a marriage that is unequal. We are the weaker partner, the far weaker partner. The US population is 8.9, 8.8. It's 8-9 times larger than our population. We're 40 million. The US is probably 350 million, somewhere around there. But their economy, the American economy, is more than 10 times our size. And so we are the weak partner. Picture a marriage. We're one, we're the poor, beholden wife who has to do whatever her husband says. And I'll tell you right now, given the realities of the situation, probably the wisest thing to do would be for Canada to join in with the US and to become that 51st state. But that's a complicated discussion to have because emotion takes over, and emotion, it trumps, an unfortunate word, but emotion trumps sane, rational thinking. Well, I feel Canadian. Now, I approach this from the perspective of an individual who spent 10 years growing up in the US. I'm Canadian born, but when we moved back to Canada permanently in 1978, when I was turning 12 years of age, I was, for all intents and purposes, my worldview was that of an American, albeit an 11 turning 12-year-old, but I viewed the United States of America as home at that time in 1978. As I grew older, I came to appreciate this country immensely. I saw immense advantages that Canada had over the United States of America. I found Canadians to be far more polite, forgiving, tolerant. We don't have the racial issues that they have had forever. in the United States of America, and those racial issues continue to this day. I'm praying that in the years to come, it has gotten better, and I pray it keeps getting better. I actually do not think Donald Trump is a racist. I think Joe Biden was more of a racist than Donald J. Trump. Trump doesn't, the only color Donald Trump really cares about is the color green. He doesn't care about black and white. He cares about green. American money is green. It's not like ours, blue and pink and green. Or, well, we used to have pink, but we don't anymore. That was our old $2 bill. Well, blue and purple and green and red and brown. Let me read what is being said. Oh, I've got a few things coming on. Okay. Seo Jamalik is writing that America doesn't have the infrastructure for steel manufacturing today, so get the money now. What I was saying earlier, the U.S. had a large steel, probably the biggest steel industry in the world. Starting to sound like Trump. We were the greatest, okay? It was amazing. We had the greatest steel industry, and now it's nothing. We're going to make America great again. We're going to rebuild our infrastructure. We're going to rebuild our industry, our manufacturing. It's going to be fantastic. You might pay a little bit more now, but it'll be worth it down the road. All right. Anyway, enough of a Trump impression. They can rebuild their steel industry. That means jobs, building the infrastructure, building the plants. And CEO Jamalik said at some point, I guess I was bragging about something, and says that it is nothing to brag about. I don't know what I was bragging about, but whatever it was. When you put a comment down like that, tell me what you're talking about specifically. Sorry, because I don't always read it as you write it. I read it sometimes several minutes later. Airworks 07 says, hard to know. Okay, I'd read that. And Airworks cannot stand Mark Carney being briefed by ministers when he isn't even in government. Amen. He is receiving briefings at the highest levels from government ministers, and he is not a sitting member of parliament. He's not the leader of the Liberal Party. He's not had a security clearance, nothing like that. And yet, this tells you right now, it's not an election. They're not electing a leader. They are coronating a leader. Mark Carney they've appointed him. It's the same way that the Democratic Party forced Kamala Harris onto Americans and said, here, we don't care who you wanted. This is who we're putting out for you. And the Liberal Party is saying, we don't care what you want. We don't even care. 300,000 Liberal Party hacks, card-carrying members, are going to decide who the next Prime Minister of Canada is. And he could be Prime Minister all the way until October, although my prediction right now is that Mark Carney, once he takes over as leader of the party, within days, maybe weeks, bang, Canadians will be heading to an election. Mark Carney is going to run a shadow campaign. He's not going to have a record to run on, except the fact that he's been advising the Trudeau Liberals as they have destroyed Canada over the last several years. But anyway, I've got another newer name. Tom Kallenberg is saying global boycott on the USA and Elon. We're heading to a time, if you look at the situation that's unfolding in the Middle East, we're seeing a clash. And I do believe that we are seeing many of the same elements that led to the First World War. This rise in protectionism emanating from the US, Trump talking about wanting to take over Greenland, take back over the Panama Canal, have Canada as the 51st state. You have a war going on between Russia and Ukraine. I haven't touched on that, but Trump is saying, I'll end it. You know, it never would have happened if I'd been president. That war never would have happened. You have that war going on. You have the war in the Middle East between Israel and basically Iran, but Iran fights through its proxies. And you've got, and I can never remember, I've got to check this. Either Sweden or Norway just joined NATO or is in the process, and it will very shortly be joining NATO. I think it's Sweden, a historically neutral nation. You have countries lining up their dance partners, so to speak. We have BRICS, you know, forming an alliance. That's BRICS is Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That's BRICS, but it includes other countries as well. They are making overtures to the Saudis to join in and become part of BRICS. And there are other African nations joining in with BRICS. The world is dividing up. Everyone is getting their dance partner set up in much the same fashion that happened in the days leading up to World War I. World War I, and then you had increased military spending. What do we have right now? We have Donald Trump telling NATO countries that they need to get to that 2.5%. Canada, my native Canada, I'm a military veteran. I left the Canadian Armed Forces in June of 2021. And Canada, we don't even spend 2% when NATO members are committed. They make a commitment to spending 2.5% of GDP, and we're not even at 2 yet. And now Trump is calling on NATO countries to increase their level of spending from 2.5, which Canada hasn't made it to yet, and there are a few other countries down with us. And he wants it elevated up to 5%. Why is that? Look at what China is doing militarily. Look at the number of aircraft carriers they're building. They're going to be able to exert their influence in much the same way. They're looking to be the new top dog in the world. Pax Americana, they want it replaced by Pax Sino-China, or whatever term you want to put on it. And we're talking about a Marxist ideology here. And things are not good. Things are not good. And I think what Donald Trump right now is doing, and he's not going to say it openly, is that he's preparing the US for a confrontation. A confrontation. He wants the war in Ukraine over because it's a drain on the Americans. I don't know, I think it's 350, I don't know how many hundreds of billions the Americans have sent over to Zelensky in Ukraine to keep that war going. And now Trump is saying he's going to end it. He's basically going to allow, it sounds like, listening to Hegstead, this new defense secretary that just took over, was just recently confirmed and is now in the job. And he is saying, you know, that Crimea, forget it. It's Russia's now. He's saying that other territory as well is going to remain in Russian hands and Russian control, that the Ukrainians, that Zelensky is going to have to cede territory. But then the war ends, and then the US and Canada stop sending, I don't know how much Canada's sent over there. It's insane. It's not our fight. And further, Hegstead has said that Ukraine will not be allowed to join NATO, which was, in my mind, that was the primary motivation behind the invasion to begin with. That NATO was signaling that they were going to allow Ukraine to join, which would put a NATO, an adversarial power nation, right on the doorstep of the Russians. And they wouldn't put up with it any more than the Kennedy administration was willing to put up with the Cubans having ballistic missiles and nukes 90 miles away from the Florida coast. Another historical reference. Co Jamalik says, where are those children from the border during Trump's last presidency? The same thing, the same problems plagued the Biden administration when Biden took over. You know, when you have a wide open border and people are just storming into the country, it's got to be a nightmare to administer. And things are, it's not going to go well. It is not going to go well. There are going to be, and then you've got a media that will shine the spotlight on the most emotionally driven stories because they know people, when they get emotional, they don't think of the children. Oh my God, the children. And I don't say that to be crass. It's just that we live in a messy world, and the media, wherever they want to shine the spotlight, they can trigger you. I use the example of Yemen on this channel often. Yemen has been going through since 2014, 2015. It's been like a 10 plus year long civil war going on in that country, and 400,000 people, over 400,000 people have been killed. 400,000 dead Yemenis. 250,000 of them are reckoned to be children under the age of 5. No one cares. And the reason no one cares is because the media didn't put a spotlight on it. It wasn't at the top of the news feed. It wasn't on the news feed at all. You never heard about it. And so people don't care. But if Hamas is firing rockets from right next door to a hospital, and then Israel responds and takes that rocket launcher out and kills civilians, because that's what Hamas does. They put their military assets in and around civilians and civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, refugee camps. That's where they operate from, because it's a no-lose proposition. They don't give a rat's rosy rear end about their people. They don't care about their people. All they care about is destroying Israel and wiping it off the map from the river to the sea. And if 10,000, 40,000, 100,000 men, women, and children in Gaza have to die to achieve that goal, well, praise be to Allah. And this is kind of the world. This is the world we're heading to. And I think China's just sitting back. China's just sitting back and saying, okay, you guys beat the crap out of each other in Gaza, in Ukraine. You guys all go nuts. And we'll just sit back and wait. And then we'll make our move. I equate it somewhat. It's a bit of a trite analogy, but I think it fits. The Godfather saga, the Godfather movie, the first one, where it's Barzini. He's kind of China, hiding in the background, pulling the strings of the Tattaglia family, getting them to go at the Corleone family. Corleone family is the United States of America. Tattaglia family, kind of like Iran. And interestingly, you've got Iran is allied with Russia. Russia is allied with China. They signed something called a no limits partnership 4 or 5 years ago. What does no limits mean? That's up for some debate. Foreign policy type experts debate the degree to which that goes. Does it include military? We'll find out. Danny writes, Carney is Trudeau light. Carney is smarter than Trudeau. That's a very low bar. I mean, Trudeau is about 4 or 5 French fries short of a Happy Meal. Trudeau is not a bright man. He can memorize things, though. He can study his lines, and then shortly thereafter, he can repeat them back. And he's got his teleprompter, and he's great at evoking phony emotion. Canadians care deeply about one another and about this and that fake emotional voice of his. I cannot stand it. But a lot of Canadians seem to prefer it over Pierre Poilievre's direct, pretty much emotionless, here are the facts approach. People like emotion. They respond, we are emotional creatures at our core. This part of our brain, if you believe in evolutionary biology, this part of the brain where the higher thought processes take place, they say it evolved later, and that you get down into the mammalian brain and the reptilian brain. There are different names for these things, but that's where we retreat to when our emotions are engaged. When our emotions are engaged, especially fear is a big one. When our emotions are engaged, this part of our brain, the frontal lobe, shut down, and we retreat back into our more mammalian, animalistic brains, fight or flight. Anyway, Airworks says, I don't think he is Trudeau light, echoing kind of what I just said. But I'm echoing you because you wrote it before I said it. I don't think he is Trudeau light. I think he is worse as he is more intelligent. Bang on, Airworks. I think you're 100% on the money. And a while ago, back when shortly after the announcement that Trudeau was stepping down and that we're going to have a leadership race, and then when Freeland and Mark Carney threw their hats in the ring, shortly right around that time, I put out a video saying, it's Mark Carney. He's going to win. And I further speculated that he could potentially, knock the Conservative Party under Pierre Poilievre down from their overwhelming majority. They were polling at numbers that suggested they'd win 250, maybe more seats in a legislature that will have about 343 seats, I think it is. Right now, there are 338, but I think it's 5 that are being added. So we're going to have a parliament of 343 seats. And the way the polling was going before Trudeau announced his intention to step down, before that, the Conservatives were polling up 43% in that area, and Liberals down around 18, 19, 20. The Conservatives were poised to win 250 seats. Now, with Mark Carney at the helm, I'm afraid that the Conservatives could be knocked down to a minority, or I still think it's possible Mark Carney could manage to win a minority government himself, that he could win more seats than the Conservatives, but not an absolute majority of those 343 seats. I don't even know what the 172, I guess, would be the number needed to have a majority mandate, just off the top of my head. I have C.O. Jamalik saying that Christina Katrina and the Box has deep meaning. I read it at 4. Not familiar with that book. And I'm something of a bibliophile. I don't just read the Bible. I've read lots of books. Everything from Dickens to Dostoevsky. And so I'll check that out. And the Box. Who's the author, if I may ask? And then Danny is writing, there's nothing new under the sun. One of my favorite quotes from the book of Ecclesiastes. It's all vanity. There's nothing new under the sun. We're all just chasing the wind, as it's written by Solomon in his later life. Solomon wrote 3 books. He wrote the Song of Solomon when he was a young man, Proverbs, Middle Ages, and then in his older years, he wrote the book of Ecclesiastes, also known as the Preacher. Thus says the preacher. He's preaching. C.O. Jamalik is writing Divorce. You will get back to where you were before this bad marriage. Yeah, but there's going to be a lot of pain. I've been through divorce. a lot of pain and a lot of misery. And we're heading to a conflict right now, and the world needs to be uniting. And I think what we're going to see is a war breaking out in the Middle East. It's going to start in the Middle East. And right now, there's something of a Trojan horse in just about every Western nation, and that's a Trojan horse in the form of a mosque. The Islamic populations in Western Europe are massive. They're extremely large in Canada, and likewise in the United States of America. Although I don't think it's as bad in the United States as it is in Western Europe. I think Western Europe is the tip of the spear. Canada, I would put us, maybe Australia, kind of second tier, and then the United States. And you're seeing the protests erupting all over the place, supporting, wiping Israel off the map. It just came out that in New South Wales, Australia, that two healthcare workers who have been identified, confirmed to be healthcare workers, were on a social media chat site talking to a Jewish gentleman from Israel. And they were saying that they have killed Jewish patients and sent them to hell. Although the word they use for hell is the Arabic word for hell. The guy made that motion. I don't even know. Well, I shouldn't have done that, but I did it. But that was what he did on the video, talking about how they treat Jewish patients in their under their care. And they said the woman, there was a man and a woman, both nursing staff, apparently, and well, not apparently, confirmed in New South Wales. And they said that they have sent Jewish patients to hell, using the Arabic word for hell. You can check that out yourself. There is a hatred for Jews that is beyond, it's demonic. The hatred towards Jews and all things Jewish, and certainly the nation state of Israel, is beyond demonic. It is a hatred that comes straight from the enemy. And sadly, that hatred by Jewish people is often reciprocated. And war is coming, major war. That's my opinion. Just going to read up. And Seo Jamalik writes, nope, divorce, and it's all happy times. We shall see. We shall see. It'll be amazing, if I'm right and war does break out. America's going to need her friends. And Canada has been one of America's greatest friends. We had that little skirmish, the War of 1812, but back then we were still a colonial holding of the British. The British, is the world's biggest colonizer. Ottoman Turks, colonizers. All these empires are colonizers. It's colonizers is a bad word, but only when it's the West, when it's Western colonization. If it's the old Arabian Caliphate colonizing North Africa and on into Europe and the Iberian Peninsula, well, that kind of colonization is okay. And if it's the Ottoman Turks colonizing here, there, and everywhere, that's okay. Arab colonization and Islamic colonization is okay. But Western colonization, that's bad. Yeah. And here's another point to note. And I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but I want to reiterate it because it's an important point to make, is that Christians recognize the log in our eye, often we should, that at previous centuries past in Christian history, when individuals have been forced to convert to the Christian faith or been killed, that was wrong. And I think the larger part of the Christian community, the Big C Church, acknowledges and recognizes that that was wrong, regardless of who the purveyors of it were, whether it had been Rome or Protestant groups or whatever. And yet, the Islamic world engaged in the exact same type of behavior, forcing conversions at the point of a sword. However, they do not recognize it as having been wrong. They will defend it as having been the right thing to do because the Quran says, kill the infidel. And they view Muhammad as being the last and best prophet and better than Jesus. They think Jesus was a prophet, not the Son of God, and that Muhammad superseded him. And do we want to live in this world? Now, my faith informs me that a big battle is coming, and that before that battle comes, before it reaches the end, the king is coming back. The Prince of Peace is returning, and he will restore his kingdom. Things will be as they were meant to be. Every tear will be wiped, all misery will be vanquished. That's what my faith informs me. That's what I learned from reading this book. Danny is writing that the US population as of 2023, we're now 2025. That's why I bump it up. It was 335 million, 334.9. I was aware of the 335 figure, but I know it's a year or two old. So you got to add some. The US, look at what was happening under the Biden administration when everyone was flooding over the border. I just did a short video with a Trump inspired joke, and the joke was this. I didn't tell it very well. Did it on that old tablet, but that's what you got to use for a short. You need a narrow screen format, so I used the tablet. And the joke is this. Now, with the US having restricted immigration through the southern border, how are Mexicans coming into the US now with all those restrictions? And the Mexicans are coming in one at a time. JUAN, one at a time, or one by one. Airworks is writing, I said something well. That we are the far weaker partner. Our government needs to wake up and act like it. Amen. But let me catch up. Oh my gosh, a lot got written and I hadn't scrolled down. And air workers thanking me for my service. Hey, you're welcome. I did not, the real soldiers in my book, I was communications brands called SIGOP, Royal Canadian Corps of Signals. I worked on the radio. I updated flight ITINs. I put radios into vehicles, command post type situations, that sort of thing. Always the real servicemen and women are the combat arms, our infantry, artillery, armored tanks, and combat engineers. But they need guys like me behind the line supporting them. So let me catch up on what's being read. Airworks is of the opinion that we would be better off as a 51st state. I don't want it, but it would be better. I have the emotional part of me as well. I know the original "Oh Canada" as it was written before World War One, when it said, "Oh Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love, in us thou dost command." That's the way the anthem was written back before World War One started. In us thou dost command. However, once World War II started and Canada was sending its men, not women, sending its sons into the trenches in Europe, the words were changed. And rather than in us thou dost command, it was changed to in all thy sons command. So originally, as written, it used inclusive language, male, female, in us, in all of us. And then later, Roger Doucet would famously alter the English lyrics and include God keep our land glorious and free. That was not written. Watch some old 1970 broadcasts from Maple Leaf Gardens or other places, and you'll see that most times you didn't hear the words God keep our land glorious and free. It was the French singer Roger Doucet who wanted to add that in because the French version of the Canadian national anthem speaks far more to our religious heritage. On sait porter la croix. We know how to hold the cross. Au Canada, terre de nos aïeux, home of our confins plein de fleuves en glorieux, glorious rivers. The French version is actually far more poetic than the English, but it makes mention of our religious heritage, and Roger Doucet wanted to pay homage to that, so he started to sing "God Keep Our Land," and eventually it got adopted into the anthem, and then later. And it was under Trudeau, but I don't have an issue with this aspect of what Trudeau did. He reverted back to the original lyrics pre-World War I, but instead of in us thou dost command, who talks in that King James Elizabethan style English anymore? No one says in us thou dost. So in all of us command. Same, pretty much the same as it was originally written by Weir all the way back before World War One. And back when they changed the lyric from in us thou dost commands to in all thy sons, no one complained back then, but people were tougher back then. Now we got to complain about everything. Anyway, I'm just going to read up on the comments and see and then I'm going to call it a night. Danny's writing, reality does not care how you feel. Theo Jamalik says NATO needs to come together and tell Trump to simmer down. For what it's worth, Theo Jamalik, I do believe that, as many have said, the truth is often between the two extremes. And I'm getting the distinct impression, like if I watched Rachel Maddow, MSNBC, talking head. She was the one who lied to me about the COVID jab. She says, with every vaccinated person, the virus stops. You cannot get infected. And she was very emphatic, pounding the table. You cannot get infected. She was allowed to spread her garbage misinformation all over MSNBC and, infect the minds of millions of Americans with medical misinformation by lying to them. They didn't have enough data to know whether or not it would stop infection and transmission, but a senior executive with Pfizer then later admitted to the European Union. She was being questioned, and she said they didn't test to see if it would stop transmission. But that kind of misinformation was spread far and wide. So I can't stand her, but I forced myself to listen to her talking about the conflicts of interest that Elon Musk has, because Musk worries me. And it concerns me that an unelected individual such as himself, foreign born national, Elon Musk I think he has South African citizenship. I know he has Canadian citizenship, and I imagine he probably has American citizenship. He's a citizen of the world. And he's got business interests far and wide. And how he directs Doge, is he doing it to enhance his own personal net worth? I don't think that's an unreasonable question to ask. But at the same time, it's that spotlight. Where are they going to shine the spotlight, and how are they going to frame things? When Biden was signing executive order after executive order after executive order, And when they were putting out misinformation about Russian interference in the American election that they could never prove, they came up empty on. No one said, that this is a damage and a threat to our democracy and that it's threatening the that it's an attack on the Constitution. No one ever made those attacks against Biden. We got to be careful when you watch the mainstream media. They're telling you what to think, they're telling you what to believe, and they're even going to tell you how to feel. And we need to be better than that. Theo Jamalik writes, and this is to a large extent true. The world is sick of America. America has a bully reputation, and in many cases, well earned. America's very insular. It thinks about itself first and not the rest of the world. Anyway, Betty Zoom has shown up. I haven't seen Betty for a while. If memory serves, Niagara Falls region, a Canadian. Here, a lot of blame. Who and why? And hi back to you, Betty, as well. Rick Stewart was on, but he deleted his message. No problem. Airwork says, I am not sick of America. I am glad they are beside us. If they weren't there, we would have been taken over long ago. That, or we would have had to have, if they weren't around, then Britain would probably have remained as the world's dominant military economic power for much longer than they did. Betty's writing, it's about the States. Danny's writing, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the United States has committed approximately 56.3 billion in security assistance to Ukraine. It's tough to get a nail down on exactly how much has gone over. And Donald Trump, of course, is very hyperbolic. He likes to exaggerate. Imagine that, a politician who likes to exaggerate things. Trudeau, Poilievre, Trump, Biden, Clinton, Obama, they all do it. But when Trump does it, it's wrong. But anyway, Trump has been saying that the U.S. trade surplus, that this trade surplus that Canada has, that we enjoy over America, it's $200 billion. They're ripping us off. It's been going on too long. It's not going to happen anymore. Not under my watch. And 200 billion, forget it. It's ending. It's not all the numbers being reported both on the American and Canadian side say that it's closer. It's in around 100 billion. Well, 100 billion, 200 billion, 300 billion. Canadians sell a lot more into the United States than we buy. A lot more. Even the Canadian side, even our media admits that it's, but it's not 200 billion. It's only 100 billion. We send $100 billion worth more of things, products, resources, whatever, into the U.S. than they send us. So we do have a huge. We're the net beneficiary. Airworks is writing, I'm glad Trump is in power. He is cleaning up the mess over there. We need someone like him in Canada. Will Poilievre, first he has to win, and then he has to fulfill his commitment. And the difficulty is, you look at a situation like USAID. Are there some good things that they're doing? Yeah, I'm sure there are. But at the same time, are there a lot of useless things that they're doing? I'm going to tell you some of the experience I had. I'm going to be very as non-specific as I can. Not that I don't think I'd ever get in trouble for this. This is pretty much the way government always operates. But what happened was, it was announced at my workplace, government workplace, that we had 50,000, 60,000 still in the budget that needed to be spent. And so the call went out, what do you need? Put it in writing. What do we need? And someone said, we should get a new TV. We have this monstrous big screen TV on the wall. And it's like, I don't know how, 48, 52, 60 inches, I don't know, massive. Let's get a new TV. So we did, because they had 40, 50, 60, I forget the amount, the dollar amount. money that had not been spent in the budget that they had been allocated. And the way that government often operates, and this happens in the private sector as well, is that you're budgeted $250,000 for your department. And next year, you can go to the finance department and you say, 250, I spent 268 last year. I need 300 this year. Inflation, I've got increased costs. And you fight it out and you get the added money. Then you get to write on your resume, oversaw a budget of 300,000, of 500,000, of a million, of 5 million. The more, the larger the budget you manage, the better it is for your career. And as I say, that's not just in government, that's in private industry as well. There's empire building that goes on. And there is no doubt massive waste. And I think Trump is going to shine a spotlight on it. And those who watch MSNBC and CNN are going to say, "Oh, that's nothing." They're going to shine the spotlight. They're going to turn the spotlight off, and they're going to gaslight, and they're going to straw man, and they're going to ad hominem attack. They're going to engage in all the weak methods that they're intellectually weak. But the fact of the matter is that the vast unwashed, the population, Canada, US, doesn't matter. We're dumb as a sack of doorknobs a lot of the time. I mean, look at what happened. People followed stickers on the floor because the television told me we got to follow stickers on the floor or we'll get the deadly coronavirus and I'll be on a ventilator, so I have to wear a diaper on my face. We are dumb. And I can't. I've got to be somewhat humble because at the end of the day, when it's simply a question of emotion. If you get scared, if you allow yourself to get into it, and there have been times in my life where I've been in an emotional, frightened state where I have, that affects your ability to think critically. So I engaged just now in a bit of an ad hominem straw man, talking like Joe Biden. Oh, that was mean. That was mean. I'm going to end this off with a joke. I'm going to read the last few. Oh my gosh, I have missed so much. CO Jamalik, you've been filling it up. CO Jamalik writes, anointed, not arrogance. Airworks is saying, I don't have any faith that anyone is coming to save us. Some days I wish I did. That's a heavy topic to get into, obviously, and you're never going to find salvation through the internet. Yeah. I don't know where you are, Airworks, but there are some very good churches around wherever you are. I'm sure of it. My personal preference, I happen to like Baptist. I don't go to a Baptist church because there isn't one near me. Instead, I go to a Pentecostal. But and no church is perfect. But I'll tell you something, we are not just matter and motion. You are not the result of just time plus matter plus chance. The order of this universe is just too precise and too perfect to have just come from nothing. There is a meaning, there is a purpose, there is a reason, there is a lawmaker, there is a lawgiver, there is a plan. This is not random. I can't state it any better than that in this type of format, but this is not the type of format. All I can hope to do is to point people in the right direction and pray that they will find the answers. I'm not going to be able to give them. The answers are in here. Anyway, Rachel the Mad Cow Maddow. I never heard Rachel Maddow referred to as Mad Cow, but I like it. And thanks, Betty, for the hugs. And CO Jamalik is asking if Canadian independence is worth a few extras. We'll find out what happens when push comes to shove, when the economy, I mean, we'll see what happens. We could get to this, what is it, March 12th date, and we could find out that the US is again exempting Canada and Europe. And we got to see. Donald Trump is full of bluster. That's what makes him so entertaining. He's not your, look at what normal politicians have brought us to, right? And what's that old saying? You know, the definition of stupidity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So let's keep electing career politicians, you know, who read off their teleprompters and, you know, play the diplomatic game the way it's supposed to be played, and let's expect a different result. Well, no, Donald Trump breaks the mold very much. And a lot of people, you know, they're comfortable with the old system. They recognize that we're on a, you know, slow and steady decline, but well, it's slow and steady. It's not too bad. But a lot of Americans woke up and said, you know what? Let's change it up. Let's change. Let's try something different. See how it works. And if that COVID pandemic hadn't been declared, Donald Trump would have romped in 2020. They would not have been able to have inundated the voting stations with unverifiable, millions of unverifiable, you know, hand signed ballots. What are you supposed to do? Get, you know, hundreds of campaign workers? Well, yeah, it looks good enough to me. How do you verify that many signatures coming in on that many mailed in ballots? It was a recipe for, didn't never pass the smell test, that bloody election, but you're never going to be able to prove that it was fraudulent. You can't prove it empirically, because what are you going to do? Go through every one and, you know, match it up against a signature? How many millions of mail-in ballots did they receive? Tens of millions? Forget it. You know, you think it takes, you know, you got to vote in person. You got to vote in person. You got to show up. You got to show your ID and get your ballot. I love our Canadian system. I don't like our political framework, but I like the way Canadians vote. Our system is much better than the US. CO Jamalik is writing, because of ignorance, to say in order for us to get the same money next year, we can't let this extra pass. It's a bit of an unwieldy sentence. I know that, you know, typing things out, it's easier in conversation. You and I imagine, if you wouldn't mind dropping me an email, my email address is in the description. If you go to the description for this channel, click more, you'll find my email address. It's canadiansoapbox@gmail.com. Canadian soapbox, because that's basically what I'm doing. I'm standing up on my soapbox. And drop me an email if you ever want. I think you and I might have some fun if we were to engage in live conversation. And I think we'd find we're a lot more conciliatory. You know, typing, I'm able to be more conciliatory than you are because you're typing, and words on a page aren't the same as talking. Anyway, yeah, Betty Zoom is saying we obey. Canadians are incredibly obedient. America was born, the United States of America was born out of revolution. And we just said, oh, whatever you say, Britain. Betty Betty Zoom is wishing everyone a good night and saying to stay off the roads. Yeah, the weather's going to be bad. Let me take a look at the old window here. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's supposed to be snowing all night, right into the morning. And again, in my area, 15 to 20. In Danny's, I think it's north of 25. Airworks is glad that he found the channel and he liked the live. Hey, if you're not subscribed, I welcome you to subscribe. I am trying to grow the channel. I do want to get my voice into the public discourse. I want to, get my thoughts, views, and opinions into the marketplace of ideas. And this is a crowded space. It's difficult. The more subscribers I get, the more likes I get, the more comments I get. This all helps the algorithms, which I don't really understand, but this is what I'm led to understand is that the more engagement you have through likes, through subscriptions, through comments, that the visibility of your channel is increased. The more visible you are, the more eyes drop on it, the more potential for more people to click the subscription button. And then who knows where things can go. I would love, I don't have any illusions that I'm going to get a call from Jordan Peterson next week or someone else, PBD or Joe Rogan, certainly. But, who knows? Who knows? And what amazes me so often is I throw out a video and I think after I put it up, well, that's not going to do well. And it's viewed, 800, 900, 1,000 times. And then I do another video and I go, oh, that was good. I bet you this one will get up 800, 900, 1,000 and gets viewed 40. And I'm like, huh? But, so I'm just going to keep putting my content out there, try and grow the channel. I've got CEO Jamalik saying we had different and they don't like it. Oh yeah, this is something. Gerrymandering is a big issue in the United States. It doesn't happen in Canada because the electoral lines are drawn by Elections Canada, not by party hacks. And what they do in the United States is one congressional district can have part in downtown Houston, but another part in geographically removed areas can be part of the same congressional district. It's insane, the gerrymandering that goes on in the United States. Canada, we don't have that. The federal body, which is called Election Canada, they draw the lines, and everything is congruous. You're not, you haven't got, I'm in East Northumberland, Peterborough South, and it's one geographic area. It's not connected to something, in Kingston with 3 or 4 ridings in between. Gerrymandering is very much an American insane, and both parties play at it. Both parties try and carve out electoral districts that reflect their party. If you're a Democrat, and Democrats tend to do well in the larger urban centers, so those are the areas they want, and then they try and get smaller rural areas added to the larger urban center. And Republicans, by contrast, because they do well in the rural parts, they want a large rural part with just a tiny bit of an urban center added to it, so that the rural voters will outnumber the city voters. Airworks is getting, do you mind telling me where you are? Airworks, just helps me remember people. CEO Jamalik, why do they do the gerrymandering? I hope that explained it to you. I'm a Republican and I get elected. And so what I want to do through an electoral commission that they'll have at the state level, if this is, say, a state election, is I will want my district to be a large rural area, and then I'll take a little section out of an urban center that I know I'm going to lose, but it's only a small section. There, 10,000 voters in this little tiny section, and there are 80,000 voters in the big rural section. And again, both sides play at it, and that's why they do it. And so Airworks is near me. I'm in Northumberland County. I'm Brighton, Ontario. I've said it many times, so why not? And CEO Jamalik writes that Florida state legislature, CEO Jamalik is down in Florida. You told me where before, but I forget exactly where. Tallahassee, I forget. But Florida state legislator looks like frat night at a college. It's all over the place. And it's not just it is not just Florida, it's all the states, and it's congressional districts at the federal level as well. It's insane. But I've rambled on far too long. I want to thank everyone for engaging. I hope you enjoyed this. I didn't touch everything I wanted to about Donald Trump, but I promised to end this with a joke. I'm going to end it with a joke and then a blessing. It's a bit of a politically incorrect joke. So please don't take offense. I'm probably going to do a short video, just a short one of those little short ones that goes out with just this joke. But I'll give you the preamble. So if you see it come on your feed, you don't have to watch the short version. Donald Trump is on Air Force One. He goes on wants to fly around the world, just check things out. And he takes a number of his staff with him. And Donald, I've done this many times. I just like to fly. It lets me, think about things. And he says, and the great thing is what I do is I can stick my hand out the window of the plane of Air Force One, and I can tell you exactly where we are, even if I don't know. I can tell just by feeling the air. And so he said, no way, sir. Come on. You just by feeling the air? He goes, oh yeah, absolutely. I can tell. So they said, will you do it? And he goes, sure, have the pilot. And the pilot drops the plane down low to, 1,000 feet or whatever the case. And then a window is opened up. Trump sticks his hand out the window and he goes, oh, this is definitely Russia. Russia. We're flying over Russia right now. I know because I can feel it in the wind. They go, well, it's cold. It's cold everywhere. Yeah, but the Russian cold is different. It's a different kind of cold. This is Russia. You check and find out. And they look at the map and the radar and the systems on the plane. And wow, they're over Russia. Then a few hours later, he's been sitting in the back, going over papers, reading, listening to briefings, and they bring him up to the window again. They say, okay, we're going to try it again with you. I can't believe you got Russia, but there's no way you can do this twice. They open the plane goes down. They open the window again. Trump puts his hand out the window and he goes, oh, this is Australia. We're over Australia for sure. They go, how do you know? Oh, it's the air. It's the pressure. I can feel it. This is an Australian heat. So it's an Australian heat, and they check the radar and the mapping and the systems, and wow, they're over Australia. And the staff is absolutely amazed. They're, my gosh, Trump, he can tell just by sticking his hand out the window. And then they decide one last time. We got to try this one more time. A few hours later, they come. They say, "Sir, we want to do it again." He goes, "All right." So they take him to the window again. They open the window and he sticks his hand out, pulls it back in, and he goes, oh, no question, this is Mexico. They go, you're incredible. They check the map. Yeah, it's Mexico. He goes, you can just tell that by the way the air feels. You know what the Mexican air feels like? He goes, oh no. When I pulled my hand back in, someone stole my watch. Like I said, a little politically incorrect. Hope you liked it. If not the joke, the video and the content of it, an hour and 40 minutes long, darn near. I'm going to end it the way I always end my videos, from scripture. There's a blessing given by Aaron over the God's covenant chosen people. God chose Abraham to father a nation that was to be a beacon and a light to the world. He gave them his law to serve as an example to the nations, to the world. They didn't always live up to their end of the bargain, but it was also through that covenant chosen people that God sent us his Savior to reconcile us to him, so that broken, fallen, sinful human beings can be reconciled to a perfect and holy God. And the blessing that Aaron was given to speak over God's covenant chosen people. And everyone who abides in Christ, confesses Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, invites him into his heart. You are part of that covenant chosen people. And the blessing that Aaron spoke over God's covenant chosen people was this: may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and be gracious to you. And may the Lord grant you peace. And he will. Even in these crazy, insane, upside down times, you can find peace, you can find comfort, and you can even find joy, happiness, gladness. You can find it. It's there. You can have it written on your heart. So at any rate, I'm going to leave the comments. Thank you, everyone. You guys filled the live chat, and it was hard to keep up, but I love it because it engages and it animates me, and it lets me know that I'm not speaking into the void. I'm probably not going to do a video tomorrow, but I will be doing one the night after. So tomorrow's Thursday, probably not Thursday night, but definitely Friday night. So good night. And everyone, I'm not going to say all the names because I'll leave some out. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And we'll see you in a few nights. And again, if you liked it and want to share it, you're welcome to do that as well. I think this was a reasonably good discussion. Anyway, good night, all. God bless.